Okay, welcome to session 2 of using grids and templates in Ableton. Like catch up, let's go back very quickly to what we've just done. In the first session we created a series of grids, if you remember, at the top, and what they enable me to do, potentially you to do, is lay out your tracks effectively, know where you are, and build pretty much building blocks of a track, right? So the way that I work is I create 3 to 4, maybe 5 different static grids at the top of each project, and you'll see on my screen in a moment when I switch it over, which hopefully is that button. Something just stunned me a minute ago. Was playing back session 1 was the amount of noise I've got at the moment in this studio, and that's all coming from the iMac that is running the streaming. So something I've got to look into. Anyhow, back to what we do. Yeah, you can see the screen now, right? So obviously the first 4 that I've got here tracks are these grids, starting off with the very top one, which is built out of 8 bars, then 16 bars, and then we've got 32 bars, right? Followed on by the next one, which is the phases that I like to use, and then we created this working grid that I mentioned, which is pretty much where the mouse is now here, right? So the reason I use a working grid is that's the one that's going to dictate, well, that's the wrong word. That's the one that's going to help me shape my track, right? Rather than reference where I am or how many kind of bars I've used, this is the one that's generally going to show me what I need to build or reflect what I'm about to build to help me balance it out. So in this example, I can see here I'm laying out one for some kind of ambient, and if you remember the first session, I just dropped these in without any thought whatsoever. But as I mentioned in the previous video, if I was making a dance track, maybe some industrial techno or some hard house, I'm going to kind of lay these out to my intros, to my outros, and depending again on the genre, whether I have a drop or not, whether I use a bridge, I'm going to put those into those blocks as well. Going below that, I've got my 4 different side chains that I use. The first one is a typical 1/4, so it's a typical 4 to the floor, bomb, 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 followed by the next one down, which I'm starting to use these staggered patterns, right? So if I zoom into that one, I've got a bit of a staggered pattern to the side chain that I'm going to use, and the one below it has got an even different pattern, and the one below that's got a different pattern still. So I can make as many of those as I need to, and what I'm generally, as I said in the first one, going to do is use a compressor, or I'm going to use some kind of ducking technique that follows that side chain to create my pulses. I don't really, in the ambient space, use a side chain to duck out obviously a kick, right? So I'm not worried about conflicting bass lines or bass frequencies that are overriding my kick, because I generally don't use a kick in the ambient styles that I do. Next one down, we then went on to creating default templates per track. If you remember here, I've got a group. Let me delete that group. If I create a new track, so I've created a MIDI one, and as you can see, my MIDI template is those first 3 blocks that you see at the bottom, which for me is console 1, utility, and EQ 8. And again, the reason I use this console 1 is because of the workflow that I've got. I use the soft tube fader systems, right? So if I create an audio track, then I get the template that I want for them. Now for me, if you remember, we rolled back and actually I use the same type of template for both, whether it's a MIDI or an audio track. They're just the starting grounds that I want. We then went on, and I remember saying that if I group these up and I get a group track, then there is no way of creating a default group, so I can't add to any of the groups that I create a series of rack elements, which I think is pretty shit actually. I think that's proper lazy of the Ableton team, but then again, I could pick the tool apart for years, but at the same time I could celebrate the tool, right, for its simplicity. But anyway, different conversation. So part 2, what we're going to do today, we're going to show about reusing it, right? So obviously what I need to do with this one is I need to throw it into a template. So what I might do as well at this point is I'm going to set up some of the stuff that I actually want in my effect chains and my master. So I'm going to work on the master as well. So let me do that first. I generally make it a bright color, so today it can be pink. And there's a few VSTs that I like to stick in to this chain. So what I'm going to do, first one I always stick in is the utility. So if I go to audio effects, stick on utility. Incidentally, you guys might find my view of the audio effects different than yours, right? And that's because what I do is that's the default view. And what you can do, if you go to audio effects, click on any of the folders, and you can uncheck the grouping folder, and you get a list like so. So like I said, the first thing I drop in is my utility. Then I drop in a couple of spectrums, and I'll show you why in a moment. After that, what I like to add is I'm always going to add my, if I can find it, for some reason we are upside down in here. Where on earth has my, yeah, there you go, Yolene. So I'm going to add Yolene into the mix, the meter. I use the pro version, but actually, do you know what? I don't know why. There was no need to get it really. There's a free version of this, which you guys can just grab, right? And it'll work and do everything you need it to do. So that's going to sit at the end of my chain. So I'm not going to worry about setting that up for the moment. Going to leave that there. Then there's a couple of other stuff that I like to chuck in as well, and I may well turn it off, right? But actually I don't particularly like, even though I use the EQ8 in here on my defaults for my MIDI and audio, I pretty much use those for a low cut or a high cut. That's all I really use them for. I find them better to get on than the auto filter, so that's why they stick them there. If I'm ever going to do any EQing, I don't use that, right? I'm going to generally use something like Fabfilter Pro Q3. So going back to my master, let me drag one of those in. So there's my Pro Q. Yep, that's kind of cool. Don't want to do that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my dynamic tools, and I'm going to bring in my compressors. And with that, it generally means I'm going to bring in, if I can find them, there they are, the multiband. And then I'm going to bring in my limiter. Now, as it's a template, at this stage, I might well bring in the C2 as well. I'm a huge fan, absolutely mental fan for Fabfilter. I think these guys have done a fantastic job since they came out. Not only are they easy to use, they're extremely effective, and actually they're pretty solid. If you do null tests across most of their filters, in fact all of them, I've never found a null test not to work. They really are worth the investment, right? So hang on there if you haven't got them. It's worth saving to get hold of the Pro C2s and the Q3s and the reverbs and everything else that they do, right? So for now, what I'm going to do in this mode is I turn all these off. I don't want them on, right? I don't need them at this stage, so they're generally off. And the reason I've got a spectrum at the beginning of the chain and at the end of the chain is that I just like to kind of visually look down every now and then, see what's going on within the mix. On top of that, anything else is kind of just a little bit of, well, you can do, you don't have to. But there's another couple of things that I like to use. So these are by a company called Master in the Mix, and there is a brilliant app called Levels. And what I can do with Levels is I do exactly the same sort of process, right? Is I stick levels at the beginning of the chain, and I can decide what I'm going to work on. I'll show you that in a moment, what particular area of interest, and I stick one right at the end of the track as well, right? So here I've got two, and at the moment, what we can do, let's just say LUFS, for example. I can stick LUFS at the beginning, LUFS at the end. What I would then do is probably later on in the stage when I'm getting closer to starting doing a pre-master, I'll bring those up side by side and I'll start having a look at what I'm doing along my mastering chain. That's pretty much it. Anything else along there is you know, it's going to be you know, personal selection. Some great stuff that I can stick in there that I really like is this Rezo. So if I stick Rezo, just to show you that at the end. Rezo's another tool by Mastering the Mix, and what that does is it picks out those nasty resonances that are kind of, you know, it might be a high-pitched skrill, it might be in a vocal, it might be whatever, but this kind of tool detects them. And in later videos, I'm going to show this in use anyway. So for now, I'm going to leave that in my chain. And there's another tool that I use similar to that that's probably a little bit more complex and maybe I'd say more accurate. Certainly has more features. Have I not got it in here? Why have I not got it in this list? You've got to excuse me, I've only rebuilt this system again for the umpteenth time. So out of the thousands of plugins that I own, some of them aren't registered, some of them aren't iLocked yet. So every time I open one, I've either got an issue of is it going to work or is it not going to work, right? But I think I have it there. So I'll do something stupid and bring it into there. No, it doesn't matter, I'll find it. So the other one is I like to use is Soothe, right? Soothe is an amazing, game-changing plugin. I think it is just phenomenal. It's made by Oak Sound. And what I'll do is I'll bring that in next to Rezo as well, right? Now it's hard to see these in action at the moment because, you know, there's no tunes going through, there's no sound going through the system. But at some point in maybe the next video, we're going to start building out some stuff. And I'll show you how I build my drones, how I use pulsing compressors and things like that. And then you'll get a feel for how these come to life. So worth looking up at the moment. If you haven't got these tools or you've not heard of them and you're interested in starting to get to the end part of your sound, then it's worth seriously taking a look at Soothe, having a look at Mastering the Mix, and have a look at Fabfilter. Even if with Fabfilter you just went down to buying Q3 and maybe the C2 or L2 compressors, you're going to be onto a game-changing journey. There's also a bundle, right, and an educational license available for you as well. Okay, so final bit in here is we're going to add to my reverb. Now, standard reverb, I don't mind it. I think it's okay. I use it, but what I don't do is I don't use their input filters. What I actually do is I do my own cutting here at the beginning. So I go back to my EQ, and I'm going to stick. It's a bit overkill, but it's what I like to do. Is I'm going to make that kind of low cut before, because generally what you don't want with your reverbs, and to be honest, I've only learnt this in the last few years, if you don't want to do reverb all across the whole frequency range, right, you generally don't want to be adding reverb to your low end frequencies. That's just going to make it extremely muddy, and all of that kind of side chaining that you've done to make sure the basses don't overlap, the kicks in that sort of genre are going to be wasted, right, because this is just going to muddy and flood the low end. So what I generally do is I'm going to make a nice cut around about this sort of frequency range here, which is about 190 to 100 I kind of go by, right, start rolling off. So for today I'll just leave it there. So that's just to say that in this chain here, all that is going to reverberate when I use that is everything above that low cut. All right, so that's pretty cool to do, and I'd say quite important, and not a lot of people use it. And it seems that when you have conversations with people, they don't even know about it, right? So that's going to go in there. What I'm going to do for my template as well is add some others that I kind of like to use. Now, another thing that I kind of need to make, you know, I always keep an eye on is that when you add a chain, add a block to your you know, the reverb here, I've got the Pro Q before that. Whatever I add before that is going to rename. You see over there, it's going to rename the actual channel itself, unless you've got a rename already. So if I just rename that and call it reverb stock, then now it doesn't matter what I add, right? So if I bring in, I don't know, just chuck the speakers in here from these guys, then it's not going to rename it, right? By the way, another good plug-in speakers, fantastic. But let's get rid of that for now. So another one that I like to add, and I like to build up a few of these for when I'm actually getting in there. I also use different tools as well. You know, if I'm doing a surround sound, a 7.1, or I'm doing a 5.1 mix, then I won't use Ableton at all. I'm generally over to Nuendo or Cubase. And then it is a game changer because you've got all types of different reverb and delays that are built for those kind of systems, right? So I'm going to do what I just said a minute ago. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take this Pro Q exactly as it is, and I'm going to stick it into this reverb, and I'm actually going to use the native, no, I'm not, I'm going to use the sorry, the Fabfilter reverb that I just mentioned, and that beauty is called Pro R. So I'm going to stick that in there like so. Not going to go into how this one works. It's a fantastic tool. Another one really, really valuable can't rate it highly enough. It's extremely dynamic and does a lot of stuff for you. As you can see here, I've got EQs for decay rates, I've got post EQs on it and all sorts of stuff. It's really, really powerful. So now I've got a different reverb. I'm going to rename that. I don't need to know about the Q3 at the beginning. For me, it's a given. Reverb. And I'm going to add a couple of other reverbs. I'm a huge fan of reverbs. I'm going to use Valhalla Room. And at the beginning of that. Also, another thing for those that don't know, make sure that when you're using a reverb and it's an effect chain, you need to make sure that you are set to the mix 100, right? So you need to have 100% return of the effect. Well, you don't have to, but you know, it's going to sound a bit bizarre if you haven't got it right. You're not going to get the effect you need. Again, this one has got loads of stuff. I can do the high and low cuts in here as well, but I'm just going to stick to my Pro Q3, like I said earlier. And I'm also going to stick one more reverb that I love working with. So let's drop insert return, and that one is called, if I can find it, Alterverb. Alter. I've not added Alterverb yet, so let's have a look. Let's go up there. Audio ease. Alterverb. Now, when you talk about reverbs and the value you get and the cost, and I guess the peer of what's the best and what's not the best, for me, the very best, the very top of this for software is this Alterverb. It's extremely expensive. You know, you're talking about £700-800, but it is the best reverb that I've ever come across. So for me, it's a given that it sits in there as well. I've not downloaded the latest IRs yet, but actually there are some incredible new IRs that they've brought out. My favorite being the longest reverb in the world, which was an oil storage tank from a Royal Navy base in Scotland. It is phenomenal. It's creamy. It goes on forever. I need to install it, which I will do after this video. But that is such a lush sounding reverb. The other ones out there, you know, great ones that to use as well. You've got all the stuff by what are they called? Is it Liquid something? Let's have a look. What's the other one I love to use? Yeah, Liquid Sonics do absolutely amazing reverbs. And of course, you've got your Lexicon as well. Right, so that's it for the reverbs on my template. And I'm going to give that a rename. And I'm going to give them a nice color. And then I'll do the same for my delays. So there is my stock delay. Insert some return tracks and start working on some of those others that I like to work with. Now for me, again, it's back to Fabfilter for their Timeless, if I can find it. Where's Timeless? Oh, I'm in the wrong one. Right, scroll down to Timeless 3. Again, incredible what you can do with Timeless. It's not just delay, it is just phenomenal what you can do with this tool. So I'm going to stick that in there as well. The next one that I use, I can find it. Where's my dub station 2. And the final one that I use, which is a bit of a left curve, but I really get on with it, is the one by Blue Cat Audio Late Replies. Cool. So I've got those there as well. We'll give those a funky color. And then we'll add in some others that I like to have. And that's going to be things like my compressors. So adding some kind of New York style compressor. And for that, I generally go around using a multitude. I've got so many different ones that I like to use. But for this one here, we're just going to stick with, if I can find it. Let's have a look. Multiband, no, not multiband. Where have you gone? There you go. Comp V6 by SSL. that's the badger. And that, is it that one I use? Let's have a look. I don't know if it is that one. It might be the one after. It might be the Valve comp that I've been using lately. Yeah, it is Valve comp. Okay. And of course, in there you're going to add whatever you want. But all I'm doing here at the moment is I'm building my templates out, right? I could, if I'm making this a very specific template, I can go back up to the top here and start laying out the actual basics of the track that I want. So let's do one MIDI, one audio, group those together. I'm going to rename that group to drones. Now what I like to do is, again, I'm anal, I don't care about the track numbers. It's not something I really use, but I like to reference the fact that I'm using a drone. So here is going to be track DRs, right? So the DR/audio. Again, I said the other day that I like to use the whites. And there's my first kind of thing, you know, my first kind of grouping that I'm going to use. I know that each of my tracks has got the three racks that I spoke about. Do I want to put something into here at this point? Well, yeah, actually I do. And do you know what? It's going to be those three. So I'm going to take those off. And it's a good starting point. Not only does it give the console that I use access to the actual group, but I've got a good start with the other stuff, right? I could go in here and start adding some glues and things like that, but I don't want to. I don't want to lock myself down that much at this stage. So I've got my drones. What else might I use for an ambient mix? If I duplicate drones and I come down, so I'm going to have my pads. And again, rather than DR, these are PD. Yeah, I told you I was anal. So in here, we're going to change that color, just so I know it stands out. I'm going to duplicate my pads. Sometimes I use a lot of orchestration, especially strings. So OS on these. I'm going to duplicate that one as well, and it's orc percussion. And rather than OS, I'm going to have OP. You're right, absolutely right, OP. So let's keep on top of these with the colours. We're going to give that a similar colour it's got. We'll a slight purple for that one. I'm going to build another one out here. I'll start coming into things like SFX. And I'll just call that FX. Another one that I might use, I'm going to duplicate that out as well. And this is going to be Vox, so vocals. And that's just simply VX. We'll give those a nice lighter colour. Let's go into there. For my SFX, I'm going to use that orange that I love. Incidentally, I think the colour palette on Ableton is just so dull. I mean, my God, it's so outdated, right? If you look at other programs out there like Bitwig, what else have we got? Bitwig, we've got Reason, Studio One, Cubase. They've all got amazing colour palettes. But I have to say, I am so bored of the colour palette that's available in Ableton. Even having the feature in there to add your own colours would be sweet. But that's only a gripe because I've been using Ableton for so long, right? So what I'm going to do is make the height available so I can see everything that I've just put in. So I've got my Vox, SFX, orchestration percussion, orchestra strings, I've got my pads, and I've got my drones. So let me just group up the side chains actually, get them out of the way. Don't need to see them. I'll put those up there. So for me, that's pretty much it, right? That's pretty much everything that I'm going to need to do for a template. The next thing to do is literally do that, right? We're going to save this as a template ready to go. So if we go to our file menu, scroll down, you'll see there save live set as a template, save live set as a default setting. That's the one I'm not going to use, right? I generally don't want to be tied down that much. So there is one that I've got, and that is pretty close to the standard setting for whatever time I open Ableton. But for this particular exercise, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save live set as a template. As always, I'm going to give it a name. As you can see, the one below I've used already, so MMFF. And I'm going to call this Ambient. And I'm going to put in the BPM, 120 BPM. And that is it. So now if I go new, get rid of everything, don't save it, I don't need to, I've got a template. I can now go straight into here, open up, and everything we've just created is now available for me to crack on and make some dark ambient music. Okay, that's pretty much it. In the next track, we're going to start filling this up in the next session, sorry. We'll start using it actually. Maybe show you how I build drones, how I use those compressors to get bizarre side chains, and pretty much go from there. But that's it from me. Enjoy, take care, keep safe. Bye bye.